Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Tracy Chernoff, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. You know what to do. Rate, review, subscribe wherever you're listening to the podcast, wherever you're watching this episode. I appreciate it very much. I'm really excited about this week's episode because it is a topic that's really important, and I have an amazing guest joining me. So let me introduce you to retired Lieutenant Colonel Kathy Lowry Gallowitz, who was a career Air Force officer who served as a public affairs officer and nurse. She has master's degrees in nursing and political science, which frame her practice and perspectives. Kathy is also the author of Beyond Thank You for Your Service, the Veteran Champion Handbook for Civilians. It was her life's calling to design and lead a never-been-done-before outreach office for the Ohio National Guard in response to 9/11 to educate and engage civilians in support of our troops and their families. Now, through her business Vanguard Veteran, she equips civilians to become veteran champions. While not serving in uniform, Kathy established and managed Buckeye sports and orthopedic specialists and got firsthand experience hiring veterans. She was also the president of the Pickerington Area Chamber of Commerce and a member of the Ohio Small Business Council Board of Governors. In Arizona, she serves as the Arizona Society of Human Resource Management's Veteran Hiring Advisor, is a member of Governor Ducey's Veterans Services Advisory Commission, and the Southwest Veteran Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. She leads the Veteran Champion movement by connecting civilians with and helping them to understand how to better support service members, veterans, and their families. As the veteran hiring concierge, Kathy helps employers strengthen their workforce by coaching them to excel at sourcing, hiring, and retaining veteran talent. And of course, her husband, Ed, is also a retired career active duty soldier. They met after his final combat tour, and together they have 7 children. So, Kathy, welcome to the podcast. That's an amazing bio.
Oh gosh, thank you, Tracy. So glad to be with you here today. Thanks for your good work and congratulations on the success of your podcast.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I know it's been quite a while since we first connected, but I'm so glad that we're finally here because this topic is really important. And when I say this topic, it's not only just, veterans in our workforce, but how we support veterans and their families in general. And I love that your book focuses on supporting civilians and their understanding of this whole element of our lives. So can you walk us through obviously your experience, you have firsthand experience being a veteran yourself, but walk us through the initial aha moment that helped you to realize that you had, a calling in all of this.
I think it was a series of events, but before the age of 35, I'd lived in at least 20 different communities. And when we finally left active duty military service, my first husband and I, we settled in Lancaster, Ohio, a town of about 30,000 south of Columbus, Ohio, because we wanted a community where we could give our children roots, because I'd never had them, and start a business because of the work ethic in the Midwest. And I started to recognize that, maybe my life experiences had been a little unique. Like, I'd never been to a funeral of a non family member until the age of 40, because when you move so much, you just don't really know people you don't get close to people who are sick, because you're just not there very long. I also learned to appreciate that I really didn't understand how America works, or at least have any grounding on the political process, because I hadn't participated in it. I had my civics courses, and of course I voted, but I was just, I didn't know what a city council was. I didn't know what a county commissioner was. So I was like, huh, that's interesting. And then what really struck me was when I was going through some really dark times. centering on divorce, a gal named Laura came alongside me and was, I call her my first veteran champion, because frankly, I'd had next to no really best friends that I could go through difficult times with. Because I had learned to be very independent. Um, and I had friends that I could call, but when you're having tough times, it's a lot better to be in person with someone there. Um, and so those are a few of the things. And then fast forward many years later, when I had the opportunity to start the outreach program in response to 9/11. Gosh, I seriously, when I saw civilians get goosebumps or heard about the goosebumps that they receive when they're doing good things for military connected people, and in this case, typically it was people in uniform, it was like, wow, there's really something here. I don't I don't know that we in our society have people who do this work full time to really um, educate and engage civilians in support of service members, veterans, and their families. And when I had the opportunity to do that, it was so fulfilling, so rewarding for me, but also for them. And so I began to really more fully appreciate that, because of my unique lens and the life that I'd led as a military kid, and then as a military officer, and then a military wife and a military mom, right? And God gave me the gift of gab, and I think the opportunity to persuade or influence or inspire people because of my value systems, what I think is important, and frankly, what I think is important to us all. And so the calling really became more clear when I realized, what, I do this work for free, right? um, in some ways, maybe I can. I want to relate it to the name of your podcast. Put the human back in human resources. Well, this is all about putting the human into the veteran, right? And remembering that we are maybe unique people with maybe some different needs, but people who are just like everybody else, and have some of the basic needs that everybody else does, of course. But we've had some unique experiences. And, we would ask that, our neighbors, our fellow faith community uh, members, especially our coworkers, have some sensitivity, appreciation, and desire to meet us more than halfway, hopefully, and help us, if you will, come all the way home and reintegrate back into civilian life after military service.
Absolutely. It really does. And it makes me think about all of the service members, active and retired, that I have in my life, who some have struggled to acclimate after returning, especially, my generation was really in Afghanistan. And when I say my generation, really like my friends from high school, when they, if anyone entered, the service, they were in Afghanistan, Iraq. I know some people who are still based out in Asia, and they've had amazing experiences, and many have made careers out of their military experience. But those who have come back have definitely struggled, not only with mental health, but also just with now becoming a civilian, or if that's the proper term for someone who's retired and then,
So let
in
me
civilian
dig into
life.
a few of those things without you even asking me some questions. I think there's important things to maybe
Yeah.
point out, if I may.
Yeah.
So, of the 2.6 million Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, about 55% feel disconnected from mainstream America. The Bush Institute reports that upwards of 84% of military members feel that America in general doesn't understand the challenges they faced.
Hmm.
Okay. And so, um, that being said, military people, veterans, are highly resilient. Okay. And yet, you mentioned some of those who have struggled. And there is a struggle coming back from combat in particular. That's a tough thing. And there can be, there is certainly a transition and an adaptation period after military service without having gone to combat.
Of course. Right.
But most military and veterans handle it very well. About 20% or so, according to the Department of Veterans Affairs, may have post traumatic stress disorder. Okay. And so that is certainly a condition that is a consequence of military service, but it's not something that everybody suffers with. That being said, even people with post traumatic stress can live full lives, manage their triggers, and are not to be feared. Okay.
Right.
Sometimes I think the sensationalism in the media alarms us about maybe that combat veteran who, may be a little scary. But, research shows that people with PTSD are not necessarily more violent or predisposed to being violent, because PTS is something that can certainly be managed. So a lot of this stems, Tracy, from the differences in military culture. You and I'm sure most of our listeners have heard of Sebastian Junger, and he was a reporter, went to combat, just a prize-winning author. He wrote the book Tribe, and the way he describes the experience, and how we as Homo sapiens, as people, were meant to be interdependent, not, wholly independent, right? So let me frame it up this way. Let's say there's no discussion really of war quite yet, but when you join the military, you wear the same clothes. Your hair, if you're a guy, looks kind of the same. The women, it's all pulled back, or at least it used to be, right? You have physical fitness standards. You have values that you ascribe to. You you may live, if you live on a base, you may live in the same community. You may go to the same eating establishment. If you're enlisted, you may sleep in the same bunk as somebody else. You may have the same boss. You may have the same job, right? And so there's tons of commonality, right? Just in your peacetime service. And so you have a tribe right there of people around you that get you, that you can joke with, that you feel very comfortable with. And then let's say you end up going into harm's way, right? Well, that commonality, that bond, is magnified in ways that most of us who've never been there don't have any understanding of, because of the risk, the danger, the support that you give people to keep you all, safe. That tribe is even thicker. So when you leave all that commonality, that camaraderie, that brotherhood we hear so much about, and you come back into a very unstructured civilian world, one that's very focused on individualism, rugged individualism, if you will, that it's really kind of more about me than it is the team, in civilian life. When we come back to that, we feel very lost. And it's difficult to reestablish that tribe because we don't like to ask for help. That's a key element of who we are. We're very, very independent, right? Pick yourself up by the bootstraps and keep marching, right? And it takes a while to develop trust, because we do feel unique. We sense the differences maybe in team, in brotherhood. We sense the difference maybe in terms of values. And so, and oftentimes civilians feel awkward, don't know what to say or what to do. And so, may not do anything, but we're lucky to serve in a time and day when most people say thank you for your service. And so that's why, I used that title for my book, because I encourage people to go beyond thank you for your service to help bring those veterans all the way home and reintegrate into civilian society, no matter where you are, be it in your neighborhood, in your place of worship, at school or at work.
Right. This is super, super helpful. And, as you were sharing, especially at the last part there, I was thinking about how tight the job market is. And I've written some articles on how we can make the job market feel a little less tight. And one of those ways is to expand our horizons on what an ideal candidate looks like, from experience to education and the like, everything in between. And in one of the articles that I recently wrote, I talked about retirees and college students, high school students, and veterans are a part of those demographics, especially in the retiree bucket. I mean, when we think about
Mm.
certain jobs that are out there that maybe, someone is looking for a certain kind of flexibility, we as employers have to be able to meet people where they are. I always say this, and provide, absolute flexibility. And what does that mean? Maybe someone only wants to work on Mondays and Tuesdays, and that could be okay. That might actually help your business more than keeping that job open. And so when I think about where we can, as listeners, as HR people, where we can actually go beyond thank you for your service, it's through these job opportunities potentially, in addition to, of course, supporting veterans who we have already in our workplace.
Absolutely. I think meeting people where they are at is a key element. Um, Being flexible, and not forgetting about military spouses, because
Mm,
they can do a lot of remote work, and the good news is there's a lot of emphasis being placed on their talent, their strengths, and employing them, and employers are going after them.
mhm,
When I talk to employers, I talk to them about building a proactive veteran talent pipeline. Now, there's lots of job boards out there specifically for veterans that you can use to immediately connect with veterans who are looking for work. But um, becoming veteran ready, if you will, as an employer, I see that as a commitment to the long haul about towards veteran hiring, to help you develop relationships in your local community and be distinguished as veteran friendly, military friendly in the activities, maybe through your corporate social responsibility or corporate citizenship, aligning your philanthropy, aligning your volunteerism
mhm.
with the veteran community, and engaging your current veteran employees in ways that's meaningful to them, that will also help your brand and help foster that proactive veteran talent pipeline for the over the long haul. Going out, one HR strategist recommends you go out and find people where they live, work, and play. And so
Mm.
being involved in the veteran community in which where you work helps you connect with the veterans who are seeking work. But there's a lot of ways to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. In retail, we always talk about this, that, you could find your next great sales associate at your local coffee shop, at your local Target store, or wherever, right? And
There you
and
go.
it makes me think about what you're saying, that, live, work, and play. You're gonna
Yep.
find, you're gonna find the talent there. It's true, and it's true in every industry that if we're focusing on the human being, we can find that person anywhere. And I've spoken with a lot of folks recently about looking beyond a resume. And actually, I already launched this on my first podcast of the year. I realized that this podcast is coming out um, after the first podcast of the year, but one of the things that I launched is this open to work mini series on my podcast, where I am inviting those who have recently been laid off or who are unemployed, who are looking for a change in career, to come on the podcast and essentially engage in what potentially will feel like a really fun interview, but will allow them
Wow.
to highlight their skills and experiences, because so many people, myself included, are boiled down to words on a paper,
One piece of paper,
one piece
exactly.
of paper.
And what's so challenging is that, writing is a tough skill for most people, right?
Yeah.
Well, and veterans are right there with them, okay? And, like most professions, we have our own jargon. We have our own,
Right. Right.
acronyms and, and yet it's the veteran job seeker's responsibility to clean up that resume so that it can be read and understood
Yep.
by the person they're sending it to, okay? So, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Our veteran job seekers need to, come up to the table in that way.
Yeah.
But I think the person looking at the resume too, if they will, be sensitive to the fact that research shows that veterans are more loyal, more disciplined, more productive than their non-veteran counterparts, and
Mm.
can potentially generate cost savings when veteran hiring and retention is done well. And so there's definitely a return on investment for the employer who maybe gives that piece of paper a little bit second or third look.
Mm-hmm.
And actually the companies that really excel with veteran hiring have a mentality of high touch. Okay,
Mm.
so they again uh, reach out to the person that's the veteran, right? And so they have hiring events, or they go out into the community and meet them, or I think your approach to having the mini interview, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as you were saying that, I was thinking, boy, what a great opportunity for a veteran job seeker.
Yeah.
now now, I mean, I'd
If you
love to
have
help
any,
you.
send them
Maybe,
my way.
well, let's work on that. Let's work on that. And yet again, another piece of military culture is that more often than not, we don't initiate the conversations.
Mm-hmm.
We wait and are asked, and it depends on your, you know, your rank, if you will, and your personality, certainly. But more often than not, you might get some yes ma'am, no ma'am
Mm-hmm.
answers.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got to be prepared to really, and that's what we coach employers on, is to how to put the candidate at ease when you're interviewing them. And how to ask behavioral questions so that they will be, you'll get to understand them better.
Mm-hmm.
And not being, if you will, discouraged or put off by sort of a more formal affect, I mean, the candidate's more formal affect, because we're basically taught to be formal, with people in quote unquote authority, until we are invited to be less formal, if you will.
Mm.
That's the best way I can kind of
Interesting.
describe that.
Yeah.
And um, you know, I was in public affairs, so part of my skill set was writing and speaking. Right. Well, that may not be the case for most of the military people who are job seekers. Most of them, they may be mechanics, or foot soldiers, or pilots. Usually, pilots don't have the gift of gab too. But anyway, yeah, let's think
Yeah.
about how we can,
Yeah.
how you can continue being a veteran champion and supporting
Thank
the
you.
veteran community through your skill set.
Yes, there you heard it here first. I love that. Let's definitely do something with this. And as you were also sharing, some of the nuances and intricacies of military life and experience and jargon versus what maybe someone who has not been in the military experiences and uses as their preferred language. But I was thinking about how so much of society today, in my opinion, is a push to be homogenous and for everyone to think and act the same, in the sense that, the perfect candidate is going to have these skill sets exactly. The perfect candidate is going to come from this background exactly. The we need to have people from this particular company or this particular background. And the reality is that we all come from different backgrounds and unique experiences. And what's so interesting is that, DE and I is obviously a huge part of what we do in work, and especially within HR, or it should be if it's not. But what at the root of it, when we're hiring, we're looking at things that are homogenous. We're looking at boiling people down to what will be the closest tie to a job description. That you can't really get more, or less diverse than that, right? So how do we as HR people focus on diversity at its core and diversity in experience? So what if someone speaks with jargon that we're not familiar with? Let's try and get to know this person, which is really the inspiration behind the mini series that I'm doing. If your company is remote or hybrid, then you know just how difficult it can be to grow your company's culture beyond a pre-scheduled Zoom happy hour or occasional lunch and learn. Well, this week's sponsor is here to solve that. They're called CultureBot. CultureBot has devised what will likely become the gold standard for growing and blossoming a company culture inside of Slack. The app is like a sidekick for any HR or people professional, automating a lot of the mundane tasks you probably are forgetting to do on a daily basis. Things like birthday and work anniversary celebrations, team shoutouts and kudos, employee introductions, and remote games. It even has health and wellness tips and conversation starters. If that piques your interest, this will get you even more excited. Today, I'm able to share a special promotion for listeners of the podcast. You can get your first 6 months of CultureBot for 50% off. Plus, if your team is under 25 employees, CultureBot is free forever. So if you're looking for a way to create a culture of appreciation and drive increased engagement and togetherness across your team, I definitely recommend checking out CultureBot. Go to getculturebot.com/humanhr. That's getculturebot.com/humanhr to get the offer. Plus, I've added the link in the show notes so you can just click right there. Now, let's get back to the podcast.
Very exciting. And so, a couple points that resonated with me. First, it's important to remember that veterans have highly transferable skills
Right.
and are easy to train. I can't tell you how many courses. I mean, I probably had 17 different jobs when I look at my military and civilian career. All right. And in the military, we train, and we train some more. Okay. That's why we have the best military in the world, is because everybody fully understands where their job starts and stops and the technical parameters for accomplishing it. We are very competent, and so we are easy to train. We also have lots of highly transferable skills. So, quick example. I don't know if you've ever heard of a military skills translator, Tracy, but
No.
more often than not, in the groups of employers that I talk to, very few have heard of them.
Yeah.
The one that I like the best is ONET, O apostrophe NET. And I'll provide a link for you to put in the show
Great.
notes to this military skills translator. But let's look at an 11 Bravo. That is an Army foot soldier, an infantryman, someone who is trained to go into combat and do the horrible nation's work of,
Yeah.
in the war zone. Okay, I
Yeah.
mean, they know how to do that horrible job. Well, you would think, okay, what the heck are they going to do when they come back to civilian life?
Hmm.
Well, the good news is, if you look at ONET and you put an 11 Bravo Army in the military crosswalk section, it's mind blowing. You'll see, I don't know, a list of 20 different civilian jobs that come up. And at the top of the list is a training and development manager.
Huh.
Okay. So yes, the primary job may be to know how to carry that weapon and use that weapon in the battlefield. But getting you to that point, you've been through boot camp, you've been through leadership training, you've been through, you know how to handle supplies, and you know how to manage a team, and you know how to train other people, probably, about how to clean the weapon. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's lots of things that you would even consider kind of hidden skills, if you will, buried skills, um, that can be leveraged if you know how to interview the person well. You look at ONET and kind of fill in the gaps between the resume and what ONET is telling you. And so you can find an employee with tons of potential. The key here is to hire for aptitude. okay, and not for the specific experience that your job description is asking for. I mean, if you have most of the skill sets, I would take a chance on that veteran, because most thrive on authority, or thrive on responsibility, excuse me, thrive on
Mhm.
responsibility, want to do a good job, want to advance, and want to make you proud. They like to contribute. And so there's a lot underneath there that you can use to strengthen your workforce, but you got to give the veteran a chance, right? And so when I was hiring, and I was in healthcare, and so that's a little bit different. That comes with pretty set credentials, but not always. Like for a front desk receptionist, or
Mhm.
other sort of non-credentialed. Of course, it was easier to hire someone who had X experience at the last doctor's office, and you
Mhm.
thought, oh boy, they're going to come in and they're going to be running. Well, that ain't necessarily so, right? Because there's so many other pieces. Do they show up on time? Do they have a good attitude? Do they know how
Right.
to treat people well?
Which
Are they
arguably
team
is like
players?
sometimes the most important piece of it.
Yes,
Attitude is
yes,
everything.
soft. Yes, thank you. Well put. Well put. And another piece I want to offer is that we, as military members, are used to receiving feedback.
Mhm.
And so, feedback is welcome and appreciated, and sometimes needed for veterans when they enter the workforce, because they feel uncomfortable. They may potentially lean in quicker than maybe would be helpful in that instance, or they may be a little bit direct, because my husband likes to say, I don't want to waste any good army oxygen, because he wants to get right to the point,
Right to the
right?
point. I like it.
Well,
That's my
I
preferred.
did, too, but there's a time and a place, right? So one more story. So I worked with this just lovely lady at a franchise. It's a serve pro franchise, and she was just a warm-hearted, kind of meek, just not a real forceful woman, if you will. And she hired this veteran to do cleaning, and the job that ServPro does. And he
Yeah.
was kind of rough around the edges, and she was like, oh, I'm not sure exactly how to take this guy. Well, she got him some coaching,
Oh, great.
and yeah, and then he started coaching some of the other veterans who may need a
Oh,
little bit of polishing,
yeah, I
right?
love
And
that.
then and then this guy ended up purchasing his own Serve Pro franchise. Okay, so there's a lot underneath that exterior shell, right? There's a lot of values, there's a lot of character, there's a lot of skills, and what do leaders do? They build people's potential. They
Yes.
help people reach their goals. Okay, they invest in people when people don't believe in themselves, right? It's leadership, it's mentorship.
Right.
And boy, if you invest just a little bit, if you mentor just a little bit as a civilian, I'm very confident that your investment will pay off in spades.
1,000%. And I love what you mention about what a leader is supposed to do, because that's absolutely right. I mean, there are so many conversations that I have thanks to my podcast, with whether it's through just DMs or LinkedIn, what have you, where I'm getting messages that people are kind of being treated almost as disposable. The manager, the leader is,
Ooh,
taking on this
ooh,
new person and not doing
dang.
right by the person, right? Not coaching, not providing.
Oh,
Like, I love that you shared that this woman provided this veteran coaching when there was an opportunity to fine tune and polish up those edges. That's exactly what a
yes,
leader is supposed to do, is to identify how
yes.
we can strengthen those opportunities.
And then Tracy, this veteran in turn offered that insight and
Oh my gosh.
understandings to the other coworkers
That
to
is a
really
perfect
strengthen the work team.
that is a perfect
Um,
example of the value of strengthening the people around us,
yeah,
the people
and
that who
and in the
work for
military,
us.
in the military, it is a priority to develop your subordinates because, we often say, what happens if I get hit by a bus tomorrow? The mission has to go on.
Right.
Somebody has to be prepared to step into my shoes. And that's just a good organizational approach that, you know, that creates a, if you will, potentially a zero fail mission mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's common sense in our world, but again, it's not necessarily that commonplace in the civilian world.
Yeah, I
So
agree. I mean, I think that we see this as being a lot of work, and it is, and that's exactly
it
why
is
when
work.
you put in the work, you get so much value out of it.
Yes. Yes. And I'm a John Maxwell trained speaker, trainer, and coach. And John Maxwell tells us that about 5% of leaders really are doing a good job leading, right?
Mm,
So most of us don't really understand how to mentor, how to develop other people, and that the 80-20 rule. What is it
yeah,
that 80% of your work comes from 20% of your people? And so it's really reasonable to invest in that top 20% of your workers to help them do more, because then they in turn will help the rest of the workforce do better. So
yeah,
it is work, but my gosh, is it rewarding,
so
right?
rewarding.
if
Yeah,
if you if you if you keep the human in HR, you keep the P in people. You just
yeah,
treat people well. Treat others as you would have them treat you. It's really not rocket science. All this, it's people science. And there's a few special things you to know when you're recruiting and retaining veteran talent. It's good to know about military culture, and it's good to know about some veteran community resources. But by golly, if you're a good leader, whew, if
yeah.
you're a good leader, you're going to be a great leader of civilians and veterans. And,
Yes,
yeah,
yes. And a great leader makes other great leaders, and we could use
yes,
more great leaders.
yes.
If the number is 5%, that's
Hmm.
really scary that
It's
95% of
sad.
people are not they're
Well,
managing rather than leading. I mean, who needs another
yes,
manager?
yes. And so another key tip is to retain your veteran talent is to offer them professional development opportunities. Now, when we're wearing the uniform, we have had some leadership training, okay? Uh, but with that leadership training is more knowledge about the military, because the more you understand your sister services and their capabilities and different jobs within your service,
Mhm.
the better you're going to be able to function. And so we've had some leadership training, but we can all always use more because we develop new insights as we
Right.
have new experiences. And the civilian environment is so different from the military environment that
Yeah.
professional development, be it leadership or career advancement or uh, informal social support, networking, all that stuff, which is important for every employee, is particularly important for veterans because our advancement path is pretty well lined out for us when we're in the military career. And so most of us do want to advance within the organization. Not everybody, most, some people are happy, not advancing, but for those eager veterans who want to excel, they are frustrated when those career advancements and that professional development is unclear or not available.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And, when I think about full circle, how we support veterans in the workforce and the workplace, I think it is important to mention for anyone listening that being an active duty military member, a veteran, um, they are considered protected classes. And so when there are decisions made at work, whether it be layoffs, promotions, raises, demotions, anything, leaves of absences, like anything, employee relations. I'm thinking of everything. Anything as an HR person that you can think of comes to mind when you think of a protected class. You have to make sure that you're including active duty and veteran members of your team, because just like we consider age and gender and sexuality and ability or disability, they are considered a protected class. Now, this doesn't mean that you walk on eggshells with everyone, just like you don't walk on eggshells with someone just because they've told you that they're of a certain age, or they have some sort of addiction, for example. Actually, this is another protected class, is those who have a diagnosed substance abuse or addiction issues. And it's not to say that you walk on eggshells, but there is a certain level of risk assessment that businesses must do when a decision is made that impacts a person of a protected class. And so it's important to keep in mind. It's important for all business leaders, I should say, that we are aware of who protected classes are and what what demographics are represented, and that we're making sure that at the end of the day, the whole point of equal employment opportunity and the EEOC in general is to make sure that we are treating people fairly, consistently, and equitably. It's, again, doesn't mean that you treat people differently. It means that you treat people with respect and fairness. So I wanted to make sure to mention that.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'd like to offer up some clarity on some of the terms you use, because oftentimes it's very confusing for people who've never served in the military.
Sure.
So there's different categories of service. The National Guard and the Reserve are called the reserve component. And so those are the people who oftentimes have a full-time civilian job and they have a part-time military job, which oftentimes can become more full-time depending on their training schedule and or if they're needed to deploy. Okay. And so there's a lot of employers who are supporting active duty military when they deploy. All right. And those employers are bound by USERA to hold those jobs, a similar job, after deployment. Then, in contrast to the reserve component, National Guard and Reserve, there is active duty. Active duty is never part-time military.
Mm-hmm.
It's always full-time military, right? So you go and live where they tell you to live, the kind of work they tell you to work. You move when they ask you to move. And so I grew up in an active duty Navy family, moving about 19 times, going to 2 different high schools, going to French speaking preschool in Paris, France, and graduating with high school in Iceland and going to college in
Wow.
Germany, right?
Oh my
Okay.
gosh.
So, yeah, so active duty people have that, kind of really, high mobility kind of lifestyle, and that very intense sort of tribe experience, okay? And so military is the same as service member, people who are currently in uniform. And then the veteran is someone who's transitioning away from military service. Now, that veteran could have served 2 days on active duty, or, you know, 40 or 50 years in the military. 50 years is a little hard, but and so the term veteran, to most people's awareness, just means that they have worn the uniform either on active duty or in the Guard and Reserve, and now they're transitioning away from that. The
Right.
other comment I would like to make, based on your uh, presentation about protected classes, is please make sure you have good EAP services for not only the veterans that you employ, but everyone, because they may need those services. And that being said, as I understand it, about 2/3 of us experience some sort of trauma in our life, right? Particularly post COVID, post pandemic. Anxiety and mental health is ever present and ever strong, and the support we need for our employees that's really important. But because of the unique life experiences, maybe combat experiences that veterans have had, having a strong EAP in place and allowing veterans to take doctor's visits at the VA
Mm-hmm.
or to the EAP, just like you would do for any other person.
Yes.
It's accommodations that you would make for any other person. I had an employer tell me once, you know, veterans are great workers, and I'm more than happy to make the accommodations for them because I'm going to make those accommodations for other
Right.
non-veterans anyway. But I know that I'm getting a strong worker, a dedicated, loyal employee, and I am more than willing to make those accommodations for someone who has served us in protecting and defending freedom, and is looking out for my business,
Mm-hmm.
and going to be there when I need them because of their character.
Right. I really appreciate you clarifying all of the terms. That's super helpful. And actually, I realized that I did not mention the reserves as part of the protected class, but it is very specific: reserves, veterans, and active duty. And so, in closing out this point, thank you again for mentioning the EAP as well. It's true. EAP is a huge benefit for every single person, and we need to make sure that that they are actually beneficial for every person in our workforce, including our veterans or active duty members or reserve members of our teams. And with that, when we think about accommodations, especially with those of the reserve component, as you mentioned, I remember this quite uh, clearly from my experience while working at Target, that we had many employees who went on military leave because they were in the
Mm,
reserves and they were deployed. And
yep.
this is actually really, really important. These leaves are um, protected by law. And again, of course, they are a protected class, but military leave specifically, I will make sure to link this in the show notes as well, is protected by law. So making sure whether you are a party of one HR component in your business or, a full blown HR team, you have to make sure that you are clear on what requirements you have and what accommodations you have, or have to provide or obligated to provide as a business. So there certainly are those elements within business and legislation out there from the government that say, hey, we have to focus on our veterans, on our reserve and active duty members of society, and how we can, of course, I know that active duty is full time, but you probably will find many people in the workforce today who are in the reserves, or if not veterans. So when it comes to kind of closing out this conversation, I would love to kind of bring it back to you, Kathy, in terms of how the listeners can be clearer on what they can do to support hiring and providing support to already actively employed veterans or potentially employees who are in the reserve, how they can support them, and where they can connect with you to learn more about how you promote veteran champions and everything in between.
That's a huge question to
I
close
know.
out on.
I
Um,
know.
I think maybe I'll take a simple approach because we've covered a lot of that, I think, already. But I would encourage everyone who's listening, whether you're in HR or not, to start developing relationships with the veterans in your workplace, in your neighborhood, at the grocery store. I mean, develop a relationship. Start working on developing that trusting relationship. And so, some tips I can offer you are just, ask softball questions like, you know, hey, heard you served in the military. Where were you stationed? What did you like best about it? What was your job? Why did you join?
Hmm.
What did you like? What are some of, maybe some of your lessons learned? What did you take away from that experience? That's a little bit more in depth.
Yeah, I love that.
But the concept though is to tread lightly, go slowly, let the veteran take the conversation where they will. Veterans have a very I think high BS meter, we call it, right? They sense insincerity very quickly, right? So, just be sincere, be authentic, lead with your heart, express sincere interest in who that person is, get to know them as people, invite them for coffee. Don't ask questions like, did you ever shoot anybody?
Mm.
Don't, tread lightly if it comes to any kind of combat experiences because they're more often than not going to want to talk to you about it. They'll only talk to combat veterans, if then, right?
Mm-hmm.
So stay away from that. Just get to know them as people. Ask how you can support them. How's it going? Reintegrating back into civilian life. Do you know where to get your car fixed? Do you have a doctor? Do you like book clubs? Do you want to join Rotary? Are
Mm-hmm.
you involved in the PTA? Just those kind of things that anybody would like as a newcomer to your community. I encourage you to take time to get to know that veteran as a person, whether they are your coworker, your subordinate, or your neighbor, if you will. Okay. And I have a little cheat sheet, if you will, on my website at vanguardveteran.com. There's all kinds of information there and resources that I hope you will take a look at. I encourage HR people to learn about military culture. I can come alongside you and offer a course to you and your team so that you're more and more aware and doing a great job with that. I encourage you to use ONET military skills translators, have a thorough onboarding checklist for your veteran teams, build a committee or a veteran employee resource group, regardless of the size of your organization, provide a vehicle through which your veteran workers, military connected workers, and their allies can build camaraderie, can create patriotic events, can offer input about maybe how to improve the workforce, and can participate in professional development opportunities. It's also really important, if you want to draw veterans to your workplace, to be involved in the veteran community. Not only is serving the veteran community outside your workplace a retention tactic, but it's really a great way to give back to those who have given so much for us. So I'm basically inviting every single one of you to join the Veteran Champion movement and be a part of the win. If you'd like to know where your company stands in terms of your veteran hiring initiative, I have a complimentary veteran ready assessment on my website. We'll put it in the show notes. I encourage you to do that, to kind of assess what your company's doing and where maybe your growth opportunities are. And then I offer a complimentary 30-minute consultation to answer your questions and see how maybe I can potentially support you more. My email address is Kathy with a K and a Y at vanguardveteran.com. And my book is Beyond Thank You for Your Service, the Veteran Champion Handbook for Civilians, available on Amazon. And the webpage is vanguardveteran.com. Tracy, thank you for having me.
Oh
Thank
my
you for
gosh.
your curiosity and for your desire to be an even stronger civilian veteran champion. We're going to have to work on that project, and
Yes.
keep up the great work. And I hope that this is the beginning of our relationship. Certainly
It
not the
absolutely
end.
is. Yes, you can consider this podcast a home and a veteran champion safe space. It's
Nice.
been such a pleasure having. You like that,
I
right?
love it.
It's been
Yeah.
such a pleasure getting to know you and what you do for this whole community. I mean, I really, really appreciate you shedding light on a topic that we have not talked about yet on the podcast. So thank you so much.
Thank you for being a leader in this space. Keep it up. Keep talking to other veterans and interviewing other hiring managers and HR people about their experiences with veteran hiring, please.
Yeah, this is a great point. Maybe I'll have to write another article specific to this.
There you go.
There we go. Thank you so much. Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.